Welcome to EP3, where Energy Plus is unleashed. In this tutorial, we'll take you start to finish through creating a Singapore educational building. We'll go through ETTV and RTTV automatic calculations within EP3. We'll look at energy efficiency measure analysis and how to compare the results. And we'll take a look at setting up a GreenMark baseline simulation. Let's start by taking a look at some of the drawings for the building we're going to create. First of all, here's a site plan. And so this building is located in the Punggol Central area of Singapore. It's oriented on a north-northeast to south-southwest axis. So we have the ground floor plan. We have a large MEP room. We have some classroom and laboratories and a large entry area. This entry area and some of these other spaces are multi-story spaces. And here we have some elevations. So a lot of repeating floors and lots of glass facing the east and west elevations. So to get started with EP3, we're going to open SketchUp. And I'm going to choose to create a new model, and I want to be careful to choose a template, so a SketchUp template that uses the units that I want to use throughout my project. That will just get everything set up in the way that we want it right from the beginning. So I will start with this simple template that has meters as the units. If this is your first time using EP3, you may need to display the EP3 toolbar. So we can go to View, Toolbars, and then click EP3. You only need the EP3 toolbar, not the EP3 to eQuest toolbar. So if you don't see this EP3 toolbar, go to, again, we go to View, Toolbars, and click on EP3. Most of the SketchUp templates have a person kind of standing in the space. We can go ahead and get rid of this person to start. We're going to start with EP3 by creating the sort of basic shape of this model using the EP3 wizard. And to do that, we can just click on the EP3 logo in the toolbar, and it will automatically start the wizard for us. So we're going to select our Energy Plus version. I will select the default of 25.2. That's the latest version of Energy Plus. We can select our units for output. So this is what our output tables and summary will be provided in. And I want to convert joules, which are the Energy Plus native units, to kilowatt hours. You can choose other units if you prefer. Inch pound is, or rather inch pound except electricity. This is what we use generally over here in the US. And this setting can be changed later on in your model if you'd like to change it. We can select a weather file. So I have a bunch of weather files already downloaded, and we'll do this later because I'd like to show you how to download and access some of these weather files. And I can also select a climate zone here. My simulation run period, I want it to run for an entire year. So the begin month will be January, and the begin day will be the 1st. Similarly, the end month and the end day will be the 12th and the 31st. Now, I'm going to actually select a year as well because this is a university campus building with classrooms and laboratories, and university buildings tend to have a little bit more flexible schedule than, say, offices or retail spaces. And those vacations, when the building is completely shut down, are often determined a little bit year to year. So we can choose 2026 as our year, and that will just, all this does is it tells the simulation which day of the week to start on. That's really all it does. It doesn't do anything different with weather files. We're just telling it we want to simulate it for 2026, which is going to start on whatever day of the week 2026 started on. Next, I can go to my internal loads. You can see I have a user library and an EP3 library. So I'll just go to my EP3 library, and I can take a couple of office type spaces. We can do an office open plan, office enclosed space, and maybe an office corridor. And I can also take a whole building occupancy type if I like. I could do a school occupancy type. Actually, let's do this part later. So we're just going to take a couple of occupancy types. Then for constructions, I will take the ASHRAE 90.1 2022 non-residential constructions. I can take a service hot water system, and under HVAC systems, for now, I will select a DOIS. So this is a direct outdoor air system with water coils and a fan coil system. Under building geometry properties, I'm going to say I want to draw my own building geometry. You can also put in some information on utility rates if you like. We won't do that at this point in time. So next, I can modify object inputs. So you can see that EP3 has built some stuff in the background. What we're seeing back here are some HVAC systems. And that is unrelated to this wizard step. Under modify internal loads, this allows you to modify some of the inputs for, say, lights, people, occupancy area, electric equipment, etc. We can also modify some inputs for HVAC systems, say a chiller, COP, or maybe fan coil availability or outdoor airflow rates. We could also modify schedules, but at this point I want to leave everything alone as it was in the wizard and just continue, because the first thing we really want to do is draw our building geometry. Here at this wizard step, we can select the construction that will be assigned to our building geometry as we're drawing our building geometry. So we have a bunch of these constructions that came in through the wizard. So those are usually denoted, if they're coming from the EP3 library, they're usually denoted by CZ and then a number. So that would be climate zone and then a number. So we see we have a climate zone 1 non-residential exterior wall construction. We have a roof construction, fixed fenestration construction, unheated slab, below grade wall, and exposed floor construction. We also have an interior wall and an interior floor ceiling construction that are default EP3 constructions. So I'm happy with those assignments, and I can click Finish Wizard. So now what we're seeing is the EP3 building geometry view. We don't have any building geometry yet, so that's the next thing that we need to do. So this button right here, if you're in the HVAC view, this button will take you to the building geometry view. It will also open our building geometry outliner. So right now we don't have anything, but we can use some of the buttons here to start creating some building geometry. This button right here allows me to add a floor. I can also add roofs, site shading, building shading. I can search for a surface by name. I can do some checks. I can show or hide window overhangs or fins. I can highlight some building shading. And we'll take a look at some of these other buttons a little bit later as well. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add a floor. So let's go back to our drawings. There we go. Let's see. And we have a ground floor, which you can see on this northwest elevation is actually a little bit below grade some of the time. But we will call it the ground floor and set the elevation to 0. Okay, so before we start by creating a floor, I want to import a background drawing. And I'm going to take another look at this ground floor plan that we have, because this is a drawing, not a DWG or a DXF. You may also import a DWG or a DXF in order to use that as a background, but in this case, we don't have a DWG or a DXF. We're going to import it as an image, and so we're going to have to scale this image once we get it into SketchUp. So I'm going to zoom in, and you can see I have these length measurements here and here. These ones are a little bit hard to read. This one clearly says 12,000. This one is actually 6,000. And that is actually 6,000 millimeters. So each of these is 6 meters. We have the 6-meter sections times 13, which gives us 78 meters. So we know from the 1 to the 14, we have 78 meters. So next I'm going to go into SketchUp and I'll say File, Import, and I'll choose that floor plan. And I can locate it anywhere, and SketchUp is going to have me kind of size it just freehand. I can make it any size that I want. The important thing is that if we look at it when I drag it this way, it ends up upside down. So we want to make sure that we drag it and size it so that it ends up right side up. And once we drop it in, it's selected. So the next thing we need to do is use this Scale Object tool. And there are 2 steps to this. First, I'm going to draw a line over my known length. So to do that, I clicked the L for line tool, and I will just put the line kind of in the middle of this grid line. And I'm going to go all the way over to the other end. And as I'm drawing, you may notice that this line is changing colors, and it's actually matching my X, Y, and Z colors in SketchUp. So green is Y, red is X, and if I hold, if it goes to a snapped grid line and I hold Shift down, now it's locked in that axis. So I'm going to use that to make sure that this length is actually locked in this axis, because we know it's on this axis. So I'll go close to where I'm going, hold Shift down so it's locked to the axis, and I can zoom in and click. Now I'm zooming in by using the scroll wheel on the mouse. So I'll click again and finish that line. And I can use space key to get back to my SketchUp select tool, which is just this solid arrow. So I can zoom out and in with the scroll. If you hold the scroll button down, you get an orbit tool as well. Okay, so now that I have a line and a drawing, I need to select both in order to use the scale tool. And I've pressed the space bar, so I have the SketchUp select tool active. If I click on the line will be selected. If I click on the drawing will be selected, but it only selects one thing at a time. I have 2 options. I can either create a box. If I go right to left, anything that is partially intersected will be selected. So now I have my line and my drawing selected. Or I can select one and then hold Control down, and then I have this little plus, and then I can select the second thing. So however you do it, now you want to have the line and the drawing selected. and then we click our scale object, and I can enter the desired length. So I want to, what it's giving me is the current length of this line, and I'm going to tell it that I want it to be 78 meters. And then it scales up my drawing to 78 meters. Now before we start drawing the building, I want to position this drawing so that the center of the building is relatively close to the origin. And the reason for doing that will make a little bit more sense in a couple more steps. So I'm going to click M on the keyboard, or you can also choose M up, choose the move tool up here. But M is the move tool. And I'm going to scroll in and just choose this point here. Now click once. And I can scroll out, and I still have this object selected. And I'm going to go over to the origin, and it should snap. And I'll click again, so now my drawing is positioned. Next, I'm going to create the actual ground floor. This is just a drawing, and now I'm going to create the EP3 ground floor. So I'll click Add Floor, and I just need to enter a name and an elevation. So the elevation is 0, and the name is going to be ground floor. Now you can see I have this little dotted box, and if I orbit, you'll see it a little bit better. I have that dotted box, so that shows us that we're working inside of something. We're not just in loose SketchUp geometry. But before I start drawing, there's one more thing I want to do. I'm going to click until I select my drawing one more time. And then I'm going to right click and say EP3-set floor plan. And I'm going to select, I only have one, but I'm going to select the ground floor as my floor. And if we refresh this dialog here, you now see that I have floor plans showing up on the dialog as well, and I can actually toggle their visibility on and off here. Okay, so now let's start drawing our zones. I like to do this from top down, so I'm going to go to Camera, Standard Views, and Top. And I'm also going to click into the ground floor. So this is this right arrow next to the ground floor in the outliner. When we created the ground floor, you may not have noticed, it's pretty subtle, but the ground floor shows up in this outliner. So I'll go ahead and click, and now I'm inside the outliner. Or now I'm inside the ground floor, and I can start drawing my zones in the ground floor. So I like to use the rectangle tool. We can select it on the toolbar here. And the first thing I'm going to do is just draw the general outline of the building. And as soon as I draw a space, it will show up here. And they just get generic numbers for now, but we'll go through and modify that later as we keep going. But to begin with, I'm just going to create the general outline of the building by creating some rectangles. And I can go spacebar back to the select tool. You'll notice one thing that's happened is now we can't see the drawing anymore. So we'll hit V, which gives us X-ray mode. So now we can see through into the drawing behind this building outliner. And now I can start making some subdivisions. So I can do another rectangle. So I can select the rectangle tool here, or I can hit R, and I can do a rectangle for that MEP room. And then we can do a rectangle for, if we look at the key here, we have L, which is a workshop, M, which is another workshop, and N, which is an engineering lab. So I may combine some of these zones. So let's do M and L combined. N is going to be its own. I like to have these edges really lined up, so I'm going to hit spacebar, select that line, and then M to move it. And if I can select an endpoint, that will give me a handle on that edge. So I can grab the end and put it next to this other end here. So we'll just keep going with our room designations. So I'll use a rectangle to create this stairway. And then let's take a look at what O and P are, decide if we want to divide them. So one is a workshop and one is an office. So we'll go ahead and divide those. So I'm going to do spacebar and then L for line and divide those. So this part of the building seems to be pretty well divided up. So now we have A right here, which is a multi-level entry lobby. So I'm going to use the rectangle tool, so the shortcut R, and draw that space. J is an additional workshop. Down here I have a stairway. And then I and H are actually what connected, so I'm going to erase that line. So E is the shortcut key for the eraser. And then H, let's see, I and H are welding and a welding workshop. And then G is another workshop. So I'll do L and divide this one. Then we have some lavatories here. So I'm going to do a rectangle. So R is the shortcut. And I'll draw that space. Now we have a little inset here, so I can draw another rectangle. And then E is a shortcut to erase this edge here. And again, this section of space here is actually part of this multi-level space. So I'm drawing that rectangle and then erasing this edge. Then I have C and B, which are a lab and another lab, but they're quite large. So we'll divide those spaces up, and we'll also create this stairway. So R for rectangle to draw the stair, and then we'll divide these up. And this one looks like it connects to this space here, so I will create that space like this. So now I have my general spaces defined for my building. And you may want to give this floor plan more or less detail depending on the type of analysis that you'd like to do. So I'm going to hit save. And the next thing I want to do is I want to give my spaces names. And first, you can see that I have a couple of numbering issues. So I'm going to open my selected model dialog and click on the ground floor, and then I'll hit renumber spaces. And I should have those spaces get renumbered nicely over here so they have different numbers and they're all consecutive. The next thing I want to do is I want to define a couple of space types that I'm going to use. So I have an MEP type space, I have a couple of stairs, I have an entry lobby, I have offices, lavatories, and lab spaces. I can define these spaces if I'm going to use an EP3 method where we define space types based on space names. So I'm going to select all of my surfaces that define my spaces for each space type and assign it a name. So first, I'm going to select all of the surfaces for my stairway type spaces. So to do that, I've clicked my first space. So first, I make sure I have the select tool selected. So if you don't have select tool selected, spacebar and you'll get this black arrow that's filled in. You can select your first surface, and then to select more, you hold the control button down, and this will give a little plus mark next to the arrow, and that lets you select additional surfaces. So once you have them all selected, you can release control and then right click, and you'll get this menu here that says EP3-rename spaces. And I'm just going to call this stairs. Next, I just have this one entry lobby, so I can select the one surface, right click and say rename spaces. So entry lobby. And then I have MEP, just one space, so rename MEP. And as you can see, as I'm doing this, the names are changing in the outliner here for me. So next, let's take a look and let's select the office type spaces. I'm going to go down here and see. So we have E is an office type space and P. So P and I'm not seeing E at the moment. So we'll just, at the moment, we'll just select P as an office type space. Office. And then I can select these other ones and name them lab. And I have this one left here, which is the lavatory. I can also click in here and call it, change the name there, lab. So I'm going to save it again. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to drop in an elevation. I'm going to select outside. So I want to make sure I don't have anything selected. I'm in the general SketchUp space, so I can select a floor plan drawing. And I'm going to say File, Import, and let's import the south elevation. Kind of the same workflow as with the floor plan. So first we need to import it into SketchUp, and we're just going to give it an approximate size by clicking and dragging. Next, I need to use the SketchUp, the EP3 scale tool. And for that, I need a reference line that I know the length of. So remember, we had these tick marks, the grid lines, and we knew that this distance from 1 to 14 was 78 meters. So I will draw my line, so L for line, and I'm just using the scroll bar on my mouse to zoom in and out. And I'll go all the way to the right. And I like that this line is snapped to red, so that means it's the red or x-axis. And I'll scroll in and really get it centered on that line. So then I'll hit the space bar. Now I want to select the line and this drawing. So I can either hold Control down to select both, or I could click and drag right to left and get both selected. And then I'll hit Scale. And wow, I was really close. So I want to type in 78 meters here. All right. So next, I'm going to right click on this and I'll say EP3 Set Elevation. And I'll say Orientation South. So this right now is the kind of drawing orientation. If you remember when we looked at the drawings for this building, it's actually oriented on the site differently, but this is the drawing orientation, and later on we'll orient it properly on the site. So I'll right click, say Set Elevation, and I'll hit South. You can either choose a cardinal direction or you can choose a numerical direction if it's, say, at a 45-degree angle or 125, whatever you like. Next, you get the special arrow key, and there's some instructions down in the lower left corner. So we want to select the reference point in the elevation group or component. So that means we're going to select a point on the drawing that we want to use as a reference. And I don't actually have, well, let's see, ground floor. Yes, I can use this right-hand corner. I'm going to zoom in and choose something a little bit, well, I can choose right at this corner here. And now it's going to say select the location of the elevation. And so I can choose that same corner right about here, and it should orient the drawing for me. So there we go. And we're still in X-ray view mode. And if we refresh this outliner, we can see we now have elevations showing up, and we can toggle those on and off. So as we're drawing our subsequent floor plans, we may want to keep the elevations toggled off most of the time, but now what we're going to use it for is to measure the floor to floor height. Before we do that, I'm just going to do a visual check to make sure the scale came out right. And it looks pretty good that this edge is matching up here. And you could also see if my window locations are matching up with my floor plan, and that all looks pretty good. So I'm now going to hit T, which gives me the tape measure tool shortcut. And I can measure things in the drawing. And I'm also going to hit V, which will get us out of X-ray mode, and that makes it a lot easier to see what we're doing. So I'm going to zoom in, and I can choose a spot on the ground, and then I can just measure up. And if you look in the lower right, you'll see that I'm getting something that's real close to 4 meters. So I know that my next floor height is going to be 4 meters up from this ground floor. So I'll hide my elevation. So there are two ways to do a floor. We can either create a floor from scratch, like we did with the ground floor, using this Add Floor button, or we can copy an existing floor. Now, I like to copy an existing floor, and there's many reasons for that. One of them is that it's much easier to make sure that the exterior wall locations are in the same place. And then you can also get alignment between spaces stacking on top of each other. It means interior walls align, which reduces the number of surfaces you have in your model, and can make your simulation run a lot faster. So I will select my ground floor, and to do that, all I need to do is just select it in the outliner, and then that ground floor is selected. Now I'll use the SketchUp Move tool, so I can get to that by clicking M on the keyboard, and I'll select a point in my floor. Now, if I just click and drag now, it's just going to move the floor, and I don't want to move the floor, I want to copy it. So I'm going to hit the Control button once, and now when I move it, you can see it creates a copy. I'm going to move it until I see that the dotted line is blue. So if I move it to the right, it turns red. If I move it back, it turns green. If I move it at a diagonal, it's just a black line. And if I go up, it turns blue. So once I'm in that blue axis, I can just hit 4M on the keyboard and then press enter. Okay, so a whole bunch of things happened. It copied my floor, and it created another floor in the outliner, and it just by default called it floor 1, which actually is okay. And it also copied all of these spaces for us and gave us those space names. So we may need to adjust this floor plan, but it's a really good place to start. Before I do that, so I've just clicked out of the floor, I'm going to import another floor plan. I want to import the floor plan for the first floor. So I'll hit Control Save. And I can also, at this point, turn off the ground floor so that we have a nice, clean drawing view. So we'll do File, Import, and I'll click First Floor here. So import it, and I can import it to anywhere. And let's go in and we'll draw our reference line again. Zoom way in using the scroll bar. L for line tool got me this little pencil. I'm going to scroll out, scroll back in. I can click and then spacebar to get back to select. And then if I drag right to left, I get those two items nicely selected. And I can type in 78 meters. Okay, so now I can right click and I can say set floor plan, and it gives me a list, and floor 1 is what I want. So now it's set to the proper elevation, but I still need to move that actual floor plan so that it is in the place I want it to be. So I'll go into my outliner here and I'll select the actual floor plan. And then I'll hit M. So I want to make sure the floor plan itself is selected. We could turn on the other ground floor. And you want to make sure that just this drawing is selected and you're not moving the entire group of drawings. So just this floor plan is selected. So I'll turn that ground floor plan off again. And now we're just working with these two floor plans. So I'm going to hit V so I get my X-ray view. And I'll zoom in and I'll grab a real obvious corner here, one that I also have on my existing floor plan. And I'm just going to move it until it aligns with the drawing, and it will actually snap onto the drawing. So I can take a look and see if I'm satisfied. I actually want to move it up just a little bit from there. Let's try that again. So select the drawing, M, and I'll select a reference point and then move it just a bit. And that should give us a little bit better alignment with our previous drawing. Okay, so I'm satisfied. I'm going to hit save just to save our progress. And then I'll click into floor 1 so we can start editing floor 1. And I'm going to go to camera, standard views, and top. And that should give us a nice view of the top. Okay, so the first thing I'm noticing on this floor is that we have a bunch of spaces that are open to below. And in this case, in EP3, what we can do is we can just erase those spaces entirely. The spaces below will become multi-story spaces, and we don't need to represent them on this floor. Also, if you notice that your UI is a little bit laggy as you're doing this process, you can toggle speed draw mode, which means that this outliner won't update until you turn speed mode off. So when you're doing your first drawings like this, it can be a really useful tool. So I'll turn speed draw mode off for a minute, and you can see things go a little bit faster. Okay, here we do need to keep this walkway. And over here, there's a couple of little outdoor type spaces. And there's a little space here. And I'm just using the rectangle tool, so R and E to make these edits. So going along, the stairs are all in the same place, but we have some differences here. So we have this one very large open office. Down here, it looks like we have a long corridor with offices on either side. And there's a conference space over here. I can move this wall over a little bit because it's a little bit different on this floor. And again, you can choose the level of detail that you want based on the type of analysis that you're doing. I often like to combine spaces that are adjacent to each other that have the same occupancy types and the same exposure. So that means that I might make these corner offices their own separate zone. They might be different enough or have different enough loads, especially if they have glazing, in a hot and sunny climate. So we have another conference room here. And looks like there's labs here. I'm guessing this is potentially a small office. Okay, so I'm going to turn off speedy draw mode and I will open my selected object viewer and I'm going to click on floor 1 and say renumber spaces. And then we'll go through and we'll do the same thing that we did earlier where we're assigning space types based on space names. This is all open, so I think we need to treat it as one zone, but let's take a look at what we have. So G, F, and A. So G is a lab, F is an office, A is, we'll call that a corridor. We actually have a couple corridors. We could combine these or we could create them as separate corridors. So I'll click the 3 corridors. So it's space key for select, click the first surface, hold control down to get the other 2, and right click EP3 rename spaces, corridor. And then we have a couple of conference rooms and rename spaces, conference room. Let's see, G was a lab. Let's see where the other labs are. G. So G is the only lab, and then this is MEP. This one is a lab. And then the rest should be offices. Okay, and we're just missing one, which is this little guy, and we'll call it an office as well. Okay, so there we go. So once you do your first floor, the subsequent floors become a little bit faster. So we've done the ground floor, we've done floor 1. Now let's turn the elevation back on and take a look at our floor-to-floor height for the next floor. So I'll hit V and again measure. Actually, let's grab an edge here and then measure up. So this is going to be about 3.5 meters. So this floor height is a little bit lower. So I'll turn the elevation off. I'll select floor 1, M, grab an endpoint, hit Control. We're going to go straight up and we'll do 3.5 meters. So I'm just typing that in on the keyboard. Okay, so now that's called floor 2. We'll turn off the floor 1 and I'm going to click outside of my dotted line there and I'll say File, Import. And now it's 2nd through 5th floor. And I can drop it in. And then I'll draw my reference line. I'm moving a little bit faster because we've done this a few times. So reference line from one side to the other, making sure that it's snapped to the x-axis. Space bar to get select tool. I'll select both and then hit 78 meters. Now, before I assign it to the second floor, I can actually position it first. So I'll grab this corner again. This is our nice reference corner. And although actually that one might not be the best one for this floor. Let's grab this corner here and align it there. I can just bump it over a little bit as I like. See how it looks on that end? Yeah, I'll bump it over this way a little bit. If you have a drawing, DWG or DXF drawings that are coming in, those can be a little bit easier to align with this sort of situation. Okay, so now I'll hit right click and say set floor plan, and I'll select floor 2. If we refresh this view, that is now showing up in our outliner down here. Okay, so on this floor, we can see we gained back some of this space, which was in the ground floor. So what I want to do, I'm actually going to turn off all of the floor plans, and I'm going to turn the ground floor back on so we can use this as a reference. So I'll go into floor 2, and I'm going to draw a line this way until I reach the end here. Now you'll notice if you click something down low, it's going to warn you that you cannot have 3D geometry in a floor. So we can either undo the operation or it can try to adjust things for you. So we'll give that a shot. So it's an adjusted geometry. Let's see. And we have our line there. And same thing, I'll go this way. I can adjust the geometry and I have my line. And then I'll come back this way, and that line here should line up with this. So you can also draw a line and reference other things elsewhere. So I'm drawing a line and I'm making sure that it's on the red axis. And then if I hold the shift key down, it locks it in. So no matter where my pencil goes, it stays on the x-axis. And I can bring it this way until it lines up with this point here. And if I click here, it draws that line for me there. And it's all in 2 dimensions. And then I can click here and that fills it in. Okay, so from here we can move forward as we normally do. So I'll turn off the ground floor and I'll turn the floor plans back on and I'll hit V so we can see through. And again, camera, standard views, top, and I've got a nice top-down view. So just working left to right, we will subdivide these spaces. And I'm going to start from this edge here because I like it when everything lines up really nicely. Got this K space we'll keep separate from L. Let's see, we have M and N, which are different designations. So we'll separate those. Now things have changed around here a little bit, so we need to respect that. So I'll close this and I'll extend this edge down to there, and this will all become open to below type space. Okay, so I've gone ahead and finished the definition of this floor in the background. And we'll move a little bit faster from here on in the video. So I went in and I renumbered my floors and I named them all appropriately. And now I'll turn on that elevation and take a look at what happens with the next floors. So we notice that floors 2 to 5 are identical, and they're actually noted that way on the floor plan as well. We don't see it on this drawing, but this floor plan is identical for floors 2 to 5. When you have 4 or more floors that are identical, you can model them with a multiplier. And the way you do that is that you model the lowest identical floor and the highest identical floor, and then floating somewhere in the middle, you model that middle identical floor with an adiabatic floor and an adiabatic ceiling. The lowest level will also have an adiabatic ceiling, and the highest will have an adiabatic floor. However, when there's only 4 floors, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. Like if you have 30 floors that are identical, you would then have to model only 3 of them. So you'd model the lower level, you'd model the upper level, and you'd model the middle one with a multiplier of 28. That makes a lot of sense. In this case, I don't think it makes a huge amount of sense, and we will model these 4 floors explicitly. So let's see what the floor-to-floor height is on these floors. So I'm going to measure. So I'll measure from this level, and I'll go up. Let me get a better measurement here. So I can go from this corner and go up, and it looks like it's about 3.7 meters floor to floor height. Okay, so I'm going to hide the elevation, and then I will select this floor, and I'll use the move tool, M, and I'll click a corner, and I'll click Control, so it copies, and I'll hit on the keyboard 3.7 M and enter. So now it's given us floor 4. So we'll go in and rename these afterwards. Or I can do this now. Floor 3. And I need to copy this one up again. So I have the floor selected with the move tool. And then with this, I can reference the lower floor and up. And so I don't actually need to type in a distance. So I'll just hit Control. I'll click the lower point, and then I want to click the corner exactly the same. And I can also see that my line here, my move line, is blue. So I'll go up. So I have floor 2, floor 3, floor 4. So now I'll select floor 4, Control, let's see, Control, up. I have floor 5, and then I need floor 6. So I'm going to select floor 5 here, move, Control, and click. Okay, so I should have floor 5 and floor 6, and they're all exactly the same. So that's all I need to do for those floors. Now we need to do, let's see, well, it makes sense that, oh, I'm sorry, the 6th floor is different. Okay, so we have floor 2, 3, 4, and 5 are identical, and then we're going to modify floor 6. So we can bring in the floor 6 floor plan, and we see that we may have gotten a little bit off on our floor to floor height. So I'm going to select floor 6 and just move it down. Let's try 0.2 meters and see how that looks. That looks a little bit better. Maybe even a little bit more. Again, if you have DWG or DXF drawings, this makes this a whole lot more precise. You can do it with just regular drawings, but it's not as nice. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. I'm going to hit save. Now you may have noticed me every once in a while clicking up on the top here. If your focus has been on one of the dialogues and then you want to use shortcut keys and draw in your drawing space. So if I have the dialogue selected and I hit, say, L, it won't do anything because the focus is on the dialogue. If I want it to refocus on the geometry, I can either click in the geometry and then my L shortcut works. I can also click, so now my shortcut does not work. I can also click on the top bar here and it will focus it on the SketchUp space, and now my shortcut keys do work. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control S to save. I'll turn off my elevation, and I'm going to turn off all of these lower floors, and I will import the floor plan for the 6th floor. So same process, drop it in. We'll give it a reference line. And select those two. Set our scale. And then I'm going to locate the drawing. So we can grab this corner. So M for Move Tool. And I'll just plop it right down on top of our drawing. And then right click, set floor plan, and I'll go all the way down to floor 6 and hit OK. I'll go into floor 6 to start editing. And here's where I'm going up to the top to focus on the 3D geometry. And I'll hit V, and I'm going to change my camera to the top and look straight down. Okay, so here we notice that a whole bunch of the building kind of goes away in this stage. So this is all roof at this level. So I'm going to extend, or actually, and this is all open to below as well. So we just have this little corridor going from one side to the other. So I'm going to hit L for the line tool, and I want to draw from here to here, and I'm going to draw from here to here. And then I can erase all of this stuff. So I can use the select tool to do that. So I'm going to click on this face, or I'll click and drag right to left, and then hit delete. And same thing here, right to left. I want to make sure these edges are not selected, but hit delete. I can also go this way. This will only pick up on things that are completely surrounded if I go left to right. So I have to completely surround those surfaces, and then I can hit delete. So now we'll go in and do our zoning, and it looks like there's some similarity from the floor below. But we have a little stairway here that wasn't there before. These are still offices. This is still a lab, still a corridor. This looks like it's a little office on this story. And then we could define this as a corridor, but I don't want to get that detailed. You can choose to work differently with your model. So I'll open my selected object dialog and make sure floor 6 is selected, and I'll say renumber spaces. And I'll go into the outliner here, and we'll define these spaces. So corridor, and actually we can open that up to here. This can all be one big corridor. So again, I'll renumber my spaces again because I like them numbered sequentially. And this is stair. This is office. Let's see. That one's a stair, office, corridor. Let's see. Office, office. Let's see what E is and make sure it's a lab. So E on this level is also an office. This is also office. Stairs, lavatory, corridor, and office. Okay. And then, so I'm just saving. I think we just have one more story to create. So elevations. Yep, and we just have this like mechanical top 7th floor. So let's see, let's figure out the floor to floor height. Let's call it 3.5. So we'll hide the elevations again, and then I'll take floor 6 and copy it up 3.5 meters. Click outside this dotted box and then import the 7th floor plan. Same scale here. And we'll rescale it, 78 meters. Then we position it. And now the stairway doesn't exist on this level, but they've been quite kind and given us the outline. So that makes it quite easy for us to position this drawing and line it up with our other drawings. You may also want to choose, say, a grid point as your place to orient your drawings. That might be simpler instead of choosing a wall location, because that can maybe disappear as you go up a very tall building. So now I'll right click and say set floor plan and select floor 7. So when you do this set floor plan step, what that means is that the visibility for that floor plan will be linked to the visibility for that particular floor. You could use just the straight up SketchUp tools and show and hide the drawing separately, but that's a lot more work and interrupts the workflow. So let's go into floor 7 and I'll hit V for X-ray mode. And we can see that this floor is mostly just this big mechanical space. So let's just go ahead and create that mechanical space. I'm going to draw over the other edges, and then I'll go through and erase them. So I hit E to get the erase tool, but actually it would be a lot faster if I use select. I can select quite a lot all at once and erase it. So if I select all of this and erase in the middle, it's going to also erase the face, and I'd like to keep the face. So in here, I'm just going to do E and select all these, or erase all of these edges. And I'll just right click and call this MEP. So it's a mechanical penthouse. Okay, so give it a quick save. And I'm going to toggle all these floors back on, and I'll toggle these floor plans off. So we can see we have kind of the shape of this building. This building is kind of shaping up here for us. And I'll leave this tutorial off here. And the next tutorial we'll go through and talk about creating building roofs and exterior walls.